He looked at her while she was hooked up to a ventilator and told her she was too much baggage. Most men promised to stay for better or for worse. But when Sarah hit her absolute rock bottom, bankrupt, sick, and terrified, her husband didn't just leave. He destroyed her. He signed the papers, took the assets, and walked out the door, convinced she was a sinking ship. He thought he was cutting dead weight. He had no idea he was walking away from a dynasty. 5 years later, he walked into a ballroom and saw the woman he threw away. But she wasn't alone. She was holding the hand of a billionaire, and behind them stood 3 children who looked exactly like him. Grab your tissues and settle in. This is the story of the ultimate regret. The fluorescent lights of the ICU at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City hummed with a sound that Sarah usually associated with death. But today, they just gave her a headache. She was 28 years old, and she felt 80. The gown she wore was thin, offering no protection against the chill of the room or the icy stare of the man standing at the foot of her bed. Richard Rick Dalton checked his Rolex, a submariner she had bought him after he closed the Anderson deal 2 years ago. He looked impatient, not worried, not sad, impatient. "Sarah, look," Rick sighed, running a hand through his perfectly gelled hair. He was wearing the charcoal Tom Ford suit he usually saved for board meetings. "We have to be realistic here. Dr. Harris says the recovery time for the autoimmune flare-up is indefinite. And with the pregnancy complications?" He paused, grimacing as if he'd smelled something foul. "It's a money pit, Sarah. The insurance is capping out. We're bleeding cash. I have a reputation at Dalton & Co. to maintain. I can't have creditors calling the office because my wife needs experimental treatments." Sarah tried to sit up, but her body felt like it was filled with lead. Her throat was dry, raspy. "Rick, it's our babies. I'm carrying triplets. The doctor said if I just rest..." "Triplets," Rick scoffed, cutting her off. He pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase. "Exactly. 3 of them. Do you know the statistical probability of special needs? Of developmental delays? I signed up for a partner, Sarah. A trophy. Someone to host dinners in the Hamptons and look good on my arm at the Met Gala. I didn't sign up to be a nursemaid to a sick wife and 3 defective kids." The air left the room. "Defective?" she whispered. Rick tossed the envelope onto the rolling table over her bed. It slid next to her half-eaten cup of Jell-O. "Divorce papers," he said flatly. "I'm taking the townhouse. It was in my name before the marriage. My lawyers made sure of that loophole. You get the savings account, what's left of it, anyway, after this week's hospital bill. It's about $5,000. Generous, considering. You're leaving me." Sarah's hand instinctively went to her stomach. "Now?" "Rick, I have nowhere to go. My parents are gone. I can't work." "That's not my problem anymore," Rick said, turning toward the door. He paused, his hand on the handle, looking back with a look of pity that was far worse than hatred. "Honestly, Sarah, I'm doing you a favor. You're weak. You've always been soft. You wouldn't survive my world anyway. Now I'm free to find someone who fits the future I'm building." He opened the door. "Oh, and Sarah, don't try to contact me. My lawyer, Arthur Pendleton, will handle the rest. He's a shark, so don't bother fighting." And just like that, the father of her unborn children walked out. Sarah didn't cry. Not yet. She was in too much shock. She looked at the envelope. Dissolution of marriage. She was weak, that's what he said. She lay back against the pillow, the machines beeping rhythmically. He was right about one thing. She was soft. She had spent 5 years supporting him, typing his briefs, soothing his ego, dimming her own light so he could shine. She had let herself become a shadow, but as her hand rested on her belly, she felt a tiny, distinct flutter. A kick. Then another. Leo. Mia. Noah. She had already named them in her head. A fire, cold and blue, ignited somewhere deep in her chest. It wasn't hope. Hope was too fragile. This was rage. "Okay," she whispered to the empty, sterile room. "You want me to be strong, Rick? I'll show you strong." The next 6 months were a blur of gritty survival that would have broken the woman Rick thought he knew. Sarah didn't stay in Manhattan. She couldn't afford it. With the meager $5,000 Rick had generously left her, she moved to a dilapidated studio apartment in Weehawken, New Jersey. It smelled of boiled cabbage and old cigarettes, and the radiator clanked like a dying engine. But it had a view of the skyline where Rick was living his best life. She watched the lights of the city every night, reminding herself of what was taken. The health scare that had hospitalized her turned out to be stress-induced. Once the toxin that was Rick Dalton was removed from her life, her autoimmune markers stabilized. It was ironic. The sickness he left her for was actually him. But she was huge. Carrying triplets was a Herculean task. She couldn't get a corporate job. Who hires a woman who looks like she's about to explode? So she went underground. Before she was Mrs. Dalton, the trophy wife, Sarah had been a brilliant data analyst at a logistics firm. She was a wizard with patterns, supply chains, and predictive algorithms. She set up a workstation on a folding card table. Using her maiden name, Sarah Evans, she began freelancing on dark web forums and high-stakes freelance sites. She optimized shipping routes for anonymous importers. She fixed broken algorithms for struggling tech startups in Silicon Valley who didn't care who she was as long as the code worked. She worked 18 hours a day. Her ankles swelled to the size of grapefruits. She ate instant noodles so she could save every penny for the babies. Then came the night of the storm. It was November. A nor'easter was battering the coast. Sarah's water broke 3 weeks early. She didn't have a concierge doctor. She didn't have a private car. She called an Uber. The driver was an older man named Igor. When he saw her clutching her belly in the rain, wincing in pain, he didn't just drive. He flew. He got her to the county hospital just as the first baby was crowning. It was a chaotic, loud, terrifying birth. No private suite, just a curtain separating her from a teenager with a broken leg. But when Leo came out screaming, followed by Mia, and finally the smallest, Noah, Sarah felt a surge of power that no boardroom victory could ever match. They weren't defective. They were perfect. Small, yes, but fierce. Noah, however, needed time in the NICU. His lungs were underdeveloped. The bills started piling up again. The freelance money wasn't enough. Sarah sat in the hospital cafeteria, 3 days postpartum, weeping silently over a cup of lukewarm tea. She had 400 hurdlers left. Noah's incubator costs were $2,000 a day. "Is this seat taken?" The voice was deep, gravelly, but kind. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes, looking up. Standing there was a man who looked distinctly out of place in a New Jersey County Hospital cafeteria. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her apartment, and a heavy wool coat. He had dark hair, graying at the temples, and eyes the color of steel. Sharp, but not cruel. No. Go ahead," Sarah stammered. He sat down, placing a black coffee on the table. He didn't look at his phone. He looked at her. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, and frankly, you look like you haven't slept in a week." "I have triplets," she blurted out. "One is in the NICU, and I'm tired." "Triplets," the man whistled low. "That's a full house. I'm Alexander. Alex." "Sarah, Well, Sarah, I'm here because my nephew broke his arm skateboarding. But I hate waiting rooms. They make me anxious. He took a sip of coffee. What do you do when you aren't creating humans? It was a strange question, but Sarah was too exhausted to filter. I fix things. Broken systems, inefficient supply chains. I analyze data and tell companies why they're losing money. Alex's eyebrows shot up. Is that so? I have a company that's hemorrhaging money in its logistics division. Kensington Global. We ship rare antiques. Things keep breaking or getting lost. Sarah froze. Kensington Global. That wasn't just a company. It was an empire. It was one of the largest private holding companies in Europe. You're Alexander Kensington? She asked, her voice trembling. The recluse billionaire? Guilty, he smiled. It was a genuine smile. Tell you what, you look like you need a distraction. If you can tell me in 5 minutes why my shipping route from Osaka to London is failing, I'll pay for your coffee. Sarah pulled a napkin from the dispenser. She grabbed a pen from her purse. Do you use the Suez route, or go around the Horn for the heavy items? Suez. That's your mistake, Sarah said, sketching a rapid diagram on the napkin. Your insurance premiums on the Suez for antiques, specifically, are 20% higher due to vibration risks in the canal locks. If you switch to air freight for items under 50 LLBs and use the Cape route for furniture, balancing the time delay with a pre-staged warehouse in Lisbon, look here. She did the math on the napkin in 30 seconds. You save 14% annually, roughly $12 million. She pushed the napkin toward him. Alexander Kensington stared at the napkin. Then he stared at Sarah. He picked up the napkin as if it were a religious artifact. You did this on a napkin, while 3 days postpartum. I told you, Sarah said, straightening her back, ignoring the pain in her stitches. I fix things. Alexander stood up. He pulled a business card out of his pocket and placed it on the table. It was heavy, black cardstock with gold embossing. I don't need you to fix my shipping routes, Sarah. I need you to fix my entire operations department. I can't offer you a job right now because you need to be with your babies, but I want to offer you a retainer, a consulting fee. How much? Sarah asked, her heart pounding. For this idea alone? He waved the napkin. I'll write you a check for $50,000 right now. Consider it a signing bonus. When you're ready to work, call me. Sarah looked at the card. Then, at the checkbook he was already reaching for, $50,000. It was Noah's medical bills. It was a year of rent. It was freedom. Why? She asked. You don't know me? Alex paused, his pen hovering over the check. He looked at her with an intensity that made her shiver. Because, Sarah, I know desperation when I see it. And I know brilliance. Usually, people have one or the other. You have both. That makes you dangerous. And I like dangerous people. He ripped the check out and slid it across the table. Get your son healthy. Then let's build an empire. 5 years. 5 years is enough time for a mountain to weather, for a government to fall, or for a woman to completely reinvent herself. In the glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor of the Kensington Tower in London, the air was thin and sharp. 12 men in expensive suits sat around a mahogany table, looking nervous. They were executives from Vanguard Logistics, a company that had tried to execute a hostile takeover of one of Kensington's subsidiaries. At the head of the table sat Alexander Kensington. He looked older than he had in that New Jersey cafeteria, distinguished grey now dominating his beard, but his eyes were just as steel-hard. But the men weren't looking at Alexander. They were looking at the woman standing at the window, her back to them. She wore a cream-coloured pantsuit, that was tailored to within an inch of its life. Her hair, once a mousy, messy brown, was now a sleek, honey blonde bob that shone under the recessed lighting. She turned around. It was Sarah. But it wasn't the Sarah who had wept over Jell-O. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice low and smooth, like velvet wrapped around a dagger. "I've reviewed your acquisition proposal. It's adorable." One of the Vanguard executives, a man named Peters, bristled. "Excuse me? That offer is 20% above market value." Sarah walked to the table. She didn't sit. She loomed. She tapped a single manicured finger on a stack of documents. "You're offering 20% above market value because you know your European distribution hubs are about to be sanctioned for environmental violations. You need our clean infrastructure to hide your dirty assets. If we accept this deal, Kensington Global inherits your liability. You aren't trying to buy us. You're trying to use us as a laundry service." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Alexander leaned back in his chair, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He loved this part. "I counteroffer," Sarah continued, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. "We acquire you, for 60 cents on the dollar. You resign, effective immediately. And we keep your junior staff, who are actually doing the work." "This is an outrage." Peters stood up. "Who do you think you are?" "I am the chief operating officer of this company," Sarah said, her eyes flashing with a blue fire that could freeze water. "And I am the woman who just saved you from a federal indictment. Sign the paper, Mr. Peters, or I release the environmental report to the press in 10 minutes. Peters looked at Alexander. "Alex, are you going to let her speak to me like this?" Alexander shrugged, checking his watch. "Sarah runs the empire, Peters. I just own the building. I'd sign if I were you. She's rarely this merciful." 10 minutes later, the room was empty. They had just acquired a competitor for pennies. Sarah let out a breath and leaned against the table. "That was close. I thought he was going to call my bluff on the indictment timeline." "He wouldn't dare," Alex said, standing up and pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You were terrifying. It was magnificent." He handed her a glass. The dynamic between them had settled into a rhythm over the last 5 years. He was her mentor, her protector, and her best friend. There was a simmering tension. Everyone in the office whispered about it. But they had never crossed the line. Sarah was too guarded, and Alex was too respectful of her trauma. "How are the hooligans?" Alex asked, his tone softening instantly. "Loud," Sarah laughed, the mask of the corporate shark falling away to reveal the mother. "Leo tried to build a ladder to the moon, using the expensive encyclopedias you bought them. Mia is correcting my grammar. And Noah? Noah drew a picture of you today." "Did he?" Alex's eyes lit up. "Does it look like me, or like a potato with legs?" "A handsome potato," Sarah teased. Noah, the baby who had fought for every breath in the incubator, was now a thoughtful, quiet 5-year-old with an artistic soul. Leo was the rowdy leader. Mia was the sharp-tongued intellectual. They were the center of Sarah's universe, and they had never met their father. Sarah checked her phone. "I have to get back to New York tonight. The Winter Solstice Gala is tomorrow. You're still coming." "Wouldn't miss it," Alex said. "I hear the New York elitists are dying to meet the mysterious Essie who turned my company around." Sarah's expression darkened slightly. New York, the scene of the crime. She hadn't been back to a major social event in the city since the divorce. She had lived in London and Zurich, building her fortress. "He might be there," Sarah said quietly. Alex didn't need to ask who he was. "Rick Dalton? His firm usually buys a table," she nodded. Alex stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Let him be there. Let him see you. You aren't the broken girl in the hospital bed anymore, Sarah. You're the woman who just brought a logistics giant to its knees before lunch. If he's there, he's just another ant you can step on. Sarah looked at her reflection in the glass window. She saw the designer suit, the diamonds in her ears, the posture of a queen. "You're right," she whispered. "Let him look." Meanwhile, in a penthouse on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, Rick Dalton was staring at a credit card bill that made his stomach churn. "Vanessa," he shouted, "did you spend $40,000 on curtains?" Vanessa Dalton walked into the room. She was stunning, tall, brunette, a former runway model. She was everything Rick had said he wanted. A trophy. "They're imported silk, Rick," she said, bored. She poured herself a glass of wine, even though it was barely noon. "The townhouse looked drab. I fixed it. Stop being so cheap. You're a partner at the firm, aren't you?" Rick rubbed his temples. Yes, he was a partner, but the firm was struggling. Clients were leaving for younger, more agile competitors. And Vanessa was a black hole for money. "I need you to tone it down," Rick snapped. "The market is volatile." "Boring," Vanessa yawned. "Are we done? I have a fitting for the winter solstice gala. I need a new dress. The red one I wore to the opera is out." Rick looked at her. He remembered Sarah. Sarah, who used to clip coupons so they could save for a house. Sarah, who never asked for anything. Sarah, whom he had discarded because she was too expensive. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. "Just get something reasonable," Rick muttered. "I'm getting the Givenchy," Vanessa said, walking out. "We have to look successful, Rick. Fake it till you make it, right?" Rick sat alone in his sprawling, expensive, empty living room. He had the trophy wife. He had the penthouse. He had the reputation. But lately, when he closed his eyes, he didn't see Vanessa. He saw a pair of terrified eyes in a hospital room. He wondered what happened to the babies. The defective ones, he had called them. He shook his head, pouring a scotch. They were probably in foster care, or living in a trailer somewhere. He had dodged a bullet. That's what he told himself every night to fall asleep. "I need a big win," he whispered to the empty room. "I need a whale." He looked at the invitation for the winter solstice gala on his desk. The rumor was that Alexander Kensington was attending, the recluse billionaire. If Rick could land Kensington as a client, it would save the firm. It would pay for Vanessa's curtains. It would validate everything. He didn't know that the whale he was hunting was bringing a shark with him. And the shark knew his scent. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of velvet, silk, and old money. The air smelled of expensive perfume and massive floral arrangements of white hydrangeas. A string quartet played softly in the corner, largely ignored by the hundreds of Manhattan's elite sipping champagne and judging each other. Rick Dalton adjusted his bow tie. He felt sweat trickling down his back. "Stop fidgeting," Vanessa hissed. She looked spectacular in a silver gown that plunged dangerously low, but her grip on his arm was like a vice. "You look desperate." "I need to find Kensington." Rick scanned the room. "He's the key. If I can get 5 minutes with him." "Is that him?" Vanessa pointed toward the grand staircase. The room, usually a cacophony of chatter, suddenly went quiet. A hush rippled through the crowd, starting near the entrance and spreading outward like a wave. Descending the stairs was Alexander Kensington. He looked regal in a tuxedo, emanating that effortless power that only true billionaires possess. But no one was looking at Alexander. On his arm was a woman who stopped the room cold. She wore a gown of deep, shimmering emerald green velvet. It was strapless, hugging a figure that was curvaceous and powerful, flaring out at the bottom into a dramatic train. Around her neck sat a diamond necklace that looked heavy enough to sink a small yacht. Her face was striking, high cheekbones, luminous skin, and eyes that scanned the room with a terrifying intelligence. "Who is that?" Vanessa whispered, a rare note of jealousy in her voice. "She's stunning." Rick squinted. The woman looked familiar, the curve of her jaw, the way she held her head. But it couldn't be. "I don't know," Rick said, mesmerized. "But she's with Kensington. Come on." Rick pulled Vanessa through the crowd, maneuvering like a quarterback. He had to get there before the other sharks circled. He reached the bottom of the stairs just as Alexander and the woman stepped onto the floor. "Mr. Kensington," Rick projected his boardroom voice, stepping in front of a waiter to block their path. "Richard Dalton, Dalton & Co. Huge admirer of your work in the Asian markets." Alexander stopped. He looked at Rick with a mild, polite disinterest. "Mr. Dalton, I believe we've used your firm for legal counsel on occasion. In the past. We'd love to make that the present." Rick beamed, extending a hand. "I have some ideas about your liability shielding that could save you millions." Alexander didn't shake the hand immediately. He turned to the woman on his arm. "What do you think, Sarah? Do we need liability shielding?" Rick froze. "Sarah." He looked at the woman, really looked at her. She turned her gaze toward him. It wasn't the fearful look of the woman in the ICU. It was a look of absolute, crushing indifference. "I think," Sarah said, her voice clear and bell-like, "that Dalton & Co. is currently over-leveraged and lost 3 major class action lawsuits last quarter. I don't think they're in a position to advise a lemonade stand, let alone Kensington Global." Rick's mouth fell open. The voice. It was polished, confident, accented slightly with a transatlantic lilt, but it was her. "Sarah?" he choked out. Vanessa looked between them. "You know this woman, Rick." Sarah smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Rick. It's been a while. You look tired." "I don't understand," Rick stammered, his brain misfiring. You're with Kensington." "She is Kensington," Alexander corrected, slipping his arm around Sarah's waist protectively. "This is Sarah Evans, my chief operating officer, the architect of my company's success over the last 5 years. Rick felt like the floor was tilting. The woman he had left with $5,000 was running a multi-billion-dollar empire. "But," Rick pointed a shaking finger, "the hospital. You were dying." "I got better," Sarah said coldly. "Amazing what happens when you remove the source of the infection." Vanessa, sensing the shifting power dynamic and realizing her husband looked like a fool, stepped forward. "Well, I'm Vanessa Dalton, Rick's wife. It's lovely to meet you. That dress is divine, though perhaps a bit bold." Sarah looked at Vanessa. She didn't look with malice, but with a sort of clinical pity. "It's custom, Vanessa. And don't worry. Rick always did have a taste for things that look expensive but lack substance. I'm sure you two are very happy." It was a verbal slap so elegant that Vanessa didn't even register the sting for 3 seconds. Rick was still reeling. "Sarah, the pregnancy. What happened?" He expected her to say she lost them, or that they were in care. Before Sarah could answer, a commotion at the side entrance drew the room's attention. "Uncle Alex! Mommy!" A small boy in a miniature tuxedo came sprinting across the ballroom floor, ignoring the gasps of the socialites. He was followed by a girl in a poofy cream dress and another boy, slightly slower, holding a stuffed rabbit. "Leo, stop running!" the girl shouted, her voice bossy and sharp. The boy, Leo, skidded to a halt in front of Alexander and hugged his legs. "We escaped the nanny. The suite was boring." Sarah didn't scold them. She laughed, a genuine warm sound that Rick hadn't heard in years. She knelt down, her emerald dress pooling on the floor, heedless of the expense. "Leo, you can't just run into a party," she said, smoothing his hair. Rick stared. The boy, Leo, looked up. He had dark, curly hair. He had a square jaw. He had eyes that were a distinctive hazel green. Rick's eyes. The girl, Mia, caught up. She had the same eyes, the same nose, and the quiet one, Noah, who was clinging to Sarah's hand. He was the spitting image of Rick's own baby photos. The room seemed to spin. "These," Rick whispered, his voice cracking. "Who are these children?" Alexander Kensington stepped forward, placing a hand on Leo's head. He looked at Rick with a gaze that could peel paint. "These are Sarah's children, Mr. Dalton. Leo, Mia, and Noah." "They're—" Rick looked at Sarah. "They're mine." Sarah stood up. She towered over him in her heels. "No, Rick," she said softly, so only he, Vanessa, and Alex could hear. "You signed a paper. You called them defective. You checked out. These aren't your children." She gestured to the 3 beautiful, healthy, vibrant children who were currently looking at Alexander with adoration. "They're mine," Sarah said, "and they are the dynasty you walked away from." Rick looked at the 3 heirs. He looked at the woman who was now one of the most powerful executives in the world. He looked at Vanessa, who was checking her phone, bored. The weight of his mistake didn't just hit him, it crushed him. "Sarah," Rick pleaded, taking a step forward. "We need to talk. I have rights." "You have nothing," Alexander interjected, his voice dropping to a growl. "You have a document signed by you, relinquishing all parental rights and financial responsibility. My lawyers have it framed in my office. If you come near this family again, I will buy your law firm, fire you, and evict you from your penthouse just for sport." Do we understand each other? Rick Dalton, the man who prided himself on control, stood paralyzed. He watched as Sarah took Noah's hand, Alexander took Mia's, and Leo led the way. They turned their backs on him and walked toward the VIP section, a perfect, impenetrable unit. The crowd parted for them. Rick was left standing in the middle of the ballroom, holding an empty champagne glass, while his wife asked, "So, are we not getting the account then?" Desperation is a dangerous fuel. It makes smart men stupid and weak men reckless. 3 days after the gala, Rick Dalton sat in his office at Dalton & Co., the blinds drawn. The morning sun was too bright for his hangover. On his mahogany desk lay the morning edition of the New York Post. The headline was not what he wanted. It wasn't about him landing a big client. The Billionaire's secret family. Kensington heirs revealed at Plaza Gala. The photo was blurry, taken by a guest's phone, showing Alexander Kensington standing like a titan with the 3 children. Sarah was cut out of the frame, referred to only as a mystery executive. Rick crumpled the paper. He was bleeding money. Vanessa had maxed out the Platinum Amex yesterday on a spiritual retreat booking in Bali that she hadn't even discussed with him. His partners were asking questions about the firm's liquidity. He needed a lifeline, and he had just seen 3 walking, talking trust funds. He buzzed his intercom. "Send Pendleton in." Arthur Pendleton, the lawyer who had drafted the ruthless divorce papers 5 years ago, waddled in. He looked like a toad in a pinstripe suit. "You wanted to see me, Rick?" "The agreement," Rick said, his voice raspy. "The one Sarah signed. I want it voided." Pendleton laughed, a wet, wheezing sound. "Rick, that agreement is ironclad. We made sure of it. You relinquished all rights to avoid child support. You called them, and I quote, financial liabilities. You can't just say, oops, 5 years later because the stock went up." I was under duress. Rick lied, his eyes manic. I was grieving the loss of my marriage. I wasn't thinking clearly. Sarah took advantage of my emotional state to cut me out of my children's lives. Pendleton stared at him. "Rick, you're talking about perjury, and you're talking about going up against Alexander Kensington's legal team. They have the GDP of a small country behind them." "I don't need to win in court, Arthur," Rick hissed, leaning forward. "I need to win in the court of public opinion. Kensington is a recluse. He hates scandal. If I go to the press, if I paint myself as the grieving father who was pushed away by a cold, calculating wife and her billionaire lover, they'll settle. They'll pay me to go away. I want $50 million. Pendleton hesitated. It was dirty. It was unethical. But Dalton and Kodos was sinking, and Pendleton's pension was tied to the firm's survival. "If we do this," Pendleton warned, "there is no going back. If you miss, they will nuke you." "I won't miss," Rick said, pouring a drink. "She's weak, remember. She'll fold to protect the kids." The storm broke on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was in the kitchen of her Tribeca penthouse, making pancakes for Noah, who was nervous about his first day at a prestigious New York private school. "I don't want to go," Noah whispered, pushing his glasses up his nose. "What if the kids are mean?" "Then you tell them your mother knows karate," Alex said, walking into the kitchen. He was wearing a t-shirt and pajama pants, holding a mug of coffee. He had stayed over in the guest suite, something he did often when they were in New York to help with the kids. Mia rolled her eyes. "Mum doesn't know karate. She knows Excel, which is more boring." "Hey!" Sarah laughed, flipping a pancake. "Excel is a martial art if you use it right." The domestic peace was shattered by the buzzing of Sarah's phone, then Alex's, then the landline. Sarah picked up her mobile. It was her PR director, frantic. "Sarah, don't turn on the TV, and do not go outside." "Why?" Sarah asked, her stomach dropping. "It's Rick Dalton. He's on Good Morning America, right now." Sarah grabbed the remote and turned on the kitchen TV. There was Rick. He was sitting on the beige sofa across from the host, looking haggard, teary-eyed, and utterly sympathetic. "I just want to see my children," Rick was saying, his voice breaking perfectly. "I made mistakes. Yes, we were young. But she took them. She vanished. And next thing I know, my babies are being raised by a billionaire in London, and I'm painted as a monster. I just want to be a dad. I'm praying Sarah finds it in her heart to let me back in." The host looked sympathetic. "That must be heartbreaking, Mr. Dalton, to see another man raising your triplets." "It destroys me," Rick sobbed. Sarah stared at the screen, the spatula dropping from her hand. "That lying," Sarah's voice shook. "He signed the papers. He called them baggage." "He's playing the victim," Alex said, his face darkening into a mahog of pure fury. "He knows the public loves a redemption arc. He's trying to blackmail us." "Mummy?" Leo tugged at her apron. "Why is the man on TV crying?" Sarah snapped the TV off. "It's nothing, baby. Just a movie." But it wasn't a movie. By noon, there were 20 photographers camped outside their building. When the car service tried to take the kids to school, the paparazzi swarmed the SUV like locusts, flashing bulbs against the tinted glass, screaming, "Where's your real dad? And does Alex Kensington buy you toys?" Noah started hyperventilating in the back seat. Mia started screaming at the window. The driver had to turn around. Back in the penthouse, Sarah paced the floor, looking like a caged tigress. "He targeted the kids," she spat. He sent those photographers. He knew this would happen." "We sue him for defamation," Alex said, pacing the other way. "I'll buy the network. I'll shut him down." "No," Sarah stopped. She looked out the window at the vultures below. "That's what he wants. He wants a fight. He wants a settlement. He wants us to pay him to go away." She turned to Alex. Her eyes were dry. The panic from 5 years ago was gone. In its place was the cold, hard calculation of the woman who had restructured Kensington Global. "He thinks I'm still the wife he bullied," Sarah said softly. "He thinks I'm afraid of a little bad press. He forgot one thing." "What's that?" Alex asked. "I know where the bodies are buried," she said. "When I was his trophy wife, I did his typing. I organized his files. I know how Rick Dalton makes his money, and it's not from legal fees." Sarah pulled out her phone. "Get me the forensic accounting team," she commanded. "And call the SEC. I have a tip for them." The counterattack didn't happen in the press. It happened in the dark. For 3 weeks, Sarah let Rick have his media circus. She let him go on talk shows. She let him file his motion for restoration of parental rights. She remained silent. The public began to turn on her. They called her the Ice Queen. They said she was a gold digger who stole children from their loving father. Rick was ecstatic. He was already spending the settlement money in his head. He figured Kensington would cut a check for $50 million just to stop the noise. Then came the summons. Not a settlement offer, a subpoena. Rick sat in the deposition room at a neutral law firm in Midtown. He was flanked by Pendleton and 2 other lawyers. He felt confident. Across the table sat Sarah, alone. She wore a navy blue suit, sharp and severe. No jewelry, no makeup to hide the fatigue. She opened a thin leather folder. "Where is Kensington?" Rick sneered. "Too important to face the man he stole from?" "This isn't about Alexander," Sarah said calmly. "This is between you and me, Rick, just like old times. I'm not signing anything unless it has a lot of zeros on it." Rick leaned back, putting his feet up on the chair rung. "The public is on my side, Sarah. The judge will order visitation, maybe even custody. Unless I pay you," Sarah finished. "I'm a reasonable man," Rick shrugged. "Child support arrears, emotional distress. Let's call it 60 million, and I'll drop the suit. I'll even issue a statement saying we've reconciled amicably." Sarah didn't blink. She slid a single document across the table. "What's this?" Rick picked it up. "That," Sarah said, "is a transfer of ownership deed." Rick squinted at the legal jargon. "For what?" "For the building located at 40 Wall Street, the building where Dalton & Coder leases its offices." Rick froze. You bought my building?" "Kensington Global Real Estate Division did, last week. I'm your landlord, Rick." Sarah's voice was conversational, pleasant even. "And upon reviewing the lease agreements, I noticed something interesting. You're 6 months behind on rent. That's grounds for immediate eviction." "I can pay the rent," Rick blustered. "Business is picking up." "Is it?" Sarah slid another document. This one was a spreadsheet. It was colorful, lots of red. "This is an audit of the client escrow accounts at Dalton & Co., Sarah explained. "You remember those, don't you? The accounts where you hold client money? It seems there's a discrepancy of about $4 million. Oddly enough, that matches the exact amount transferred to a shell company in the Cayman Islands registered to a V. Dalton." Rick's face went the color of curdled milk. Pendleton, his lawyer, physically recoiled, sliding his chair away from Rick. "You hacked my accounts," Rick shouted, standing up. "This is illegal." "I didn't hack anything," Sarah said, tapping the paper. "I told you I analyze broken systems. When I bought the building, I gained access to the building's server maintenance logs. You were careless, Rick. You used the building's shared server for your private transfers. It's all public record if you own the hardware. Which I do. Sarah stood up. She leaned over the table, her face inches from his. Here is the situation, Rick. I have the SEC on speed dial. I have the Bar Association on the other line. If I release this, you go to federal prison for embezzlement. You lose your license. You lose your freedom. Rick was shaking. He looked at Pendleton for help, but Pendleton was busy packing his briefcase. I can't represent you in criminal fraud, Rick. I'm out. The lawyer walked out. Rick was alone. What do you want? Rick whispered. You want me to beg? I don't want your begging. It's worthless, Sarah said. I want you to go on TV tomorrow. I want you to admit you lied. I want you to say that you signed those papers willingly, that you abandoned your children, and that you are unfit to be a father. And then, I want you to resign from your firm and leave New York. My wife, Rick stammered. Vanessa, she'll leave me if I'm broke. The door to the deposition room opened. Vanessa Dalton walked in. She was wearing huge sunglasses and carrying a Birkin bag. She didn't look at Rick. She walked straight to Sarah. Is it true? Vanessa asked Sarah. Is he broke and facing jail? See for yourself, Sarah gestured to the spreadsheet. Vanessa looked at the numbers. She looked at the transfers to the Cayman account. Money she had spent, yes, but money Rick had told her was his, not stolen from clients. Vanessa pulled a white envelope from her bag and tossed it onto Rick's lap. What is this? Rick asked, his voice barely audible. Divorce papers, Vanessa said coldly. I'm not going to be the wife of a convict, and I'm certainly not going to be poor. She looked at Sarah. You're the smart one. You got out early. I should have asked for your advice at the gala. Vanessa turned on her heel and left. Rick sat in the silence of the room. The air conditioner hummed. He looked at the divorce papers from Vanessa on his lap and the embezzlement evidence on the table. He looked up at Sarah, the woman he had called weak. You ruined me, he whispered. No, Rick, Sarah said, picking up her folder and turning to the door. You did that all by yourself. I just balanced the books. She opened the door. Alexander was waiting in the hallway. He didn't look triumphant. He just looked relieved. Is it done? Alex asked. It's done, Sarah said. She didn't look back at the sobbing man in the room. Let's go pick up the kids. 6 months later, the summer sun dipped below the horizon of the Hamptons, painting the sky in strokes of violent orange and soft purple. Sarah stood on the deck of a sprawling oceanfront estate. It was the kind of house Rick had always talked about buying, a symbol of ultimate status. But Rick had never stepped foot here. Sarah had bought it 3 months ago, in cash. The wind whipped her hair, but she didn't feel cold. She felt light. Rick Dalton was a memory, a cautionary tale whispered about in legal circles. After the deposition, he had folded. To avoid prison, he had publicly admitted to his negligence and signed a confession regarding his financial mismanagement. He was disbarred the following week. The last Sarah heard, he was living in a small apartment in Queens, working as a paralegal for a strip mall law firm that handled slip-and-fall cases. He was drowning in debt, alone, and bitter. But Sarah didn't think about him. She was looking down at the beach. Leo, Mia, and Noah were building a massive sand castle near the water's edge. They weren't defective. Leo was the captain of his junior soccer team. Mia had just tested in the 99th percentile for mathematics, and Noah, the boy who had fought for every breath, was currently laughing his head off as the tide chased him up the sand. "They're going to track sand all over the new Persian rugs," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned. Alexander was leaning against the sliding glass door, holding 2 glasses of white wine. He looked relaxed, the tension of the lawsuit finally gone from his shoulders. "Let them," Sarah smiled, taking the glass. "It's just a rug. I can buy another one." Alex chuckled, stepping out onto the deck to stand beside her. They watched the waves in comfortable silence for a moment. "I got the paperwork today," Alex said softly. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "And?" "The adoption is finalized. The name change is legal. They are officially Leo, Mia, and Noah Kensington." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Adoption. It was what the kids wanted. They had started calling Alex Dad months ago, naturally, without any prompting. To them, the man on TV who cried was a stranger. The man who taught them to ride bikes, who sat through nebulizer treatments with Noah, who cheered for Leo. That was their father. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "For everything. You saved us, Alex. That day in the cafeteria. You didn't just give me a job. You gave me a life." Alex set his glass down on the railing. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "You have it backwards, Sarah. You saved me. Before you, I was just a rich man in an empty tower. I had assets, but I didn't have a legacy. I didn't have a home." He reached into his pocket. "I've been waiting for the ink to dry on the adoption papers," Alex said, his voice trembling slightly. A rare thing for a man who stared down hostile takeovers for breakfast. "Because I wanted to make sure we were a family on paper first. But there's one more merger I need to propose." He dropped to one knee. Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Down on the beach, the kids stopped playing. They had clearly been tipped off because they started cheering and sprinting toward the house. Alex pulled out a ring box. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a sapphire, deep and blue, surrounded by 3 smaller diamonds. "Sarah," Alex said, looking up at her with adoring eyes, "we've built an empire together. We've fought wars together. But I don't want to just be your partner. I want to be your husband. I want to wake up every day and remind you that you are not weak, you are not baggage, and you are the love of my life. Will you marry me?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Alex slid the ring onto her finger, just as the triplets crashed onto the deck, tackling them both in a group hug. "Did she say yes?" Leo shouted. "She said yes!" Alex laughed, picking Noah up. As the sun finally set, casting the family in a golden glow, Sarah looked at the ring on her finger. Then she looked at the 3 children who were supposed to be a burden, and the man who saw them as a blessing. She remembered the cold hospital room. She remembered the fear. She remembered Rick walking out the door. She silently thanked him. If he hadn't left, if he hadn't broken her, she never would have rebuilt herself into this. She never would have found the strength to walk into that cafeteria. She never would have found her true worth. Rick Dalton had thrown away a stone because he thought it was flawed. He didn't realize he was holding a diamond that just needed a little pressure to shine. And now she was shining brighter than he could ever comprehend. Sarah's journey proves that rock bottom isn't the end. It's the solid foundation upon which you can build something greater. Rick made the fatal mistake of valuing appearance over substance, and in doing so, he lost the very future he was trying to secure. He left a woman because she was weak, only to watch her become the strongest player in the game. He rejected his children because they were liabilities, only to watch them become heirs to a fortune he could only dream of. In the end, the best revenge wasn't the lawsuit or the public humiliation or even the loss of his fortune. The best revenge was Sarah's happiness. It was the fact that she didn't need him to survive. She didn't even need to hate him. She just outgrew him. Sometimes the trash takes itself out to make room for the treasure. Wow. I don't know about you, but seeing Rick get exactly what he deserved was satisfying on a whole new level. It just goes to show that you should never underestimate someone who is fighting for their family. What do you think? Did Rick deserve a second chance? Or was Sarah right to cut him off completely? And if you were in Sarah's shoes, would you have exposed his crimes or just walked away? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story touched you, or if you just love seeing justice served, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next incredible story of betrayal, revenge, and redemption. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is the person who walks away.